Number 10. Anna Chapman. Chapman is one of only 2 of the illegals program Russians arrested in June 2010 who did not use an assumed name. Officials claimed Chapman worked with a network of others until an undercover FBI agent attempted to draw her into a trap at a Manhattan coffee shop. The FBI agent offered Chapman a fake passport with instructions to forward it to another spy. He asked, "Are you ready for this step?" To which Chapman replied, "Of course." She accepted the passport, but after making a series of phone calls to her father, Vasily Kuschenko in Moscow, Chapman took his advice and handed the passport in at a local police station. She was arrested shortly after. After being formally charged, Chapman and 9 other detainees became part of a spy swap deal between the United States and Russia, the biggest of its kind since 1986. The 10 Russian agents returned to Russia via a chartered jet that landed at Vienna International Airport in Austria, where the swap occurred on the morning of the 8th of July 2010. The Russian jet returned to Moscow's Domodedovo airport, where, after landing, the 10 spies were kept away from local and international press. According to a statement from her US lawyer Robert Baum and media reports, Chapman had wanted to move to the UK. The Home Office exercised special powers via the British Home Secretary to revoke Chapman's British citizenship to prevent her return to the UK. This was done under Section 40 of the British Nationality Act 1981, introduced as part of the Nationality, Immigration and Asylum Act 2002 and Immigration, Asylum and Nationality Act 2006. This power had at that point only been used against a dozen people since its introduction. The Home Office issued legal papers revoking her citizenship on the 13th of July 2010. Steps were taken to exclude Chapman, meaning that she could not travel to the UK. After Chapman's departure to Russia, Baum reiterated that his client had wished to stay in the UK. He also said that she was particularly upset by the revocation of her UK citizenship and exclusion from the country. After her arrest by the FBI for her parts in the illegals program, Chapman gained celebrity status. Photos of Chapman taken from her Facebook profile appeared on the web, and several videos of her were uploaded to YouTube. Her affiliation with the Russian Federation led at least one media outlet to refer to her as the Red Under the Bed. Number 9. Samantha Lewthwaite. Samantha Louise Lewthwaite, also known as Sheriffia Lewthwaite or the White Widow, is a British chaotic individual who is one of the Western world's most wanted chaos suspects. Lewthwaite, the widow of the July 7th London anarchist Jermaine Lindsay, is accused of causing the passings of more than 400 people. She is a fugitive from justice in Kenya, where she was wanted on charges of possession of explosives and conspiracy to commit a felony, and is the subject of an Interpol Red Notice requesting her arrest with a view to extradition. Lewthwaite was alleged to be a member of the Somalia-based radical Islamic militant group Al-Shabaab. She was accused of orchestrating grenade attacks at non-Muslim places of worship and is believed to have been behind an attack on those watching football in a bar in Mombasa during Euro 2012. In September 2013, there was speculation over her possible involvement in the Nairobi Westgate shopping mall attack, although other reports cast doubt on this or said her role was exaggerated. She was dubbed the White Widow by the news media, a play on words referencing her race and the passing of her first husband, and the practice of referring to Chechen female self-immolating anarchists as Black Widows. Number 8. Marjorie Dadiana Chacon Rosell. The Guatemalan Marjorie Chacon, La Reina del Sur, or the Queen of the South, who in 2015 was sentenced in the United States to 12 years in prison for substance trafficking, is already released on bail in South Florida, according to an investigation by the Hispanic network Univision. Marjorie Dadiana Chacon Rosell, 47, was released from jail thanks to the fact that she managed to reduce her sentence by collaborating with the United States government. First, she faced 26 years in prison for substance trafficking and money laundering charges, but she managed to get her sentence reduced to 12 years, then got her to leave in 5 and is now free on bail, the network said. Chacon led a substance trafficking organization that moved powder from Guatemala to the United States through business with big cartels in Colombia and Mexico. Her nickname coincides with the title of a novel by Spanish writer Arturo Pérez Reverte and that of a television series performed by the Mexican actor Kate del Castillo. Number 7. Joanna Dennehy. Kevin Lee was a property developer, landlord, and lover of Dennehy. Lucas Slabazewski, a Polish national, met Dennehy through a shared interest in drinks and substances, and John Chapman was a housemate of Dennehy. Slabazewski was terminated at some point between the 19th and 29th of March 2013. Both Lee and Chapman were terminated on the 29th of March. Lee's body was found the next day near Newborough. Dennehy had dressed his body in a black sequined dress before dumping the corpse. The bodies of Slabazewski and Chapman were found on the 3rd of April near Thorney with stab wounds. After the endings, Dennehy was driven by her friend Gary Stretch to Hereford, where she stabbed 2 men, chosen separately and at random, both of whom survived. Both men were dog walkers. She stole the second man's dog. Another man traveling in the car unwillingly was later cleared of criminal involvement in the attacks. Dennehy, born August 1982 in St Albans, Hertfordshire, grew up in a nearby Harpenden and was an absent mother of 2 young children at the time of the executions. She specifically targeted men during her spree, telling her acquaintance Lloyd that she did not wish to end a woman, and especially not a woman with children. Lloyd stated Dennehy had wanted to remove 9 men in total, seeking to be like Bonnie and Clyde. Dennehy stabbed men for the purpose of entertainment, telling Stretch, "I want my fun. I need you to get my fun." She later told a psychiatrist that she had found slaughter to be Moorish, and that after the first termination, she got a taste for it. Number 6. Maria Licciardi. Licciardi was born and raised in the Neapolitan suburb of Secondigliano, a traditional stronghold of Licciardi clan. Her entire family belonged to the Camorra. Her father was a well-known guapo, or local boss. One of her brothers, Gennaro Licciardi, known as the Monkey, was a very powerful guapo, who later became the head of the clan and a founding member of the Secondigliano Alliance, a coalition of powerful Camorra clans which controlled substance trafficking and the extortion rackets in many suburbs of Naples. Gennaro passed away from blood poisoning while in the Voghera prison on August 3, 1994. Licciardi's husband, Antonio Teghemi, was also in the Camorra. Licciardi rose to power and took over as head of the clan after her 2 brothers, Pietro and Vincenzo, and her husband were arrested. She was the first female Camorrista to become the boss of the Licciardi clan and take over as the head of the Secondigliano Alliance. The passing of Gennaro Licciardi caused some disruption in the local underworld, as well as several bloody attempts to seize control, but the clan was kept in stable condition by Maria. She brought together a fragile informal coalition of 20 Camorra clans in order to expand control of the city's most lucrative rackets, from substance and cigarette smuggling to protection and other illegal activities. She also played a key role in expanding the city's substance trade market. Under her leadership, the Secondigliano Alliance became more organized, secretive, sophisticated, and consequently more powerful. Licciardi introduced many revolutionary changes to the clan. Perhaps the most important among them was the involvement in the pimping trade. Prior to this, the Camorra had a code of conduct that forbade them from making any money from pimping. However, under Licciardi, this code was broken. The Camorra would buy the girls from the Albanian mafia for $2,000 in US currency. Many of them came on the promise of legitimate work in order to escape the crushing poverty of their homeland. But once they arrived, they were practically enslaved and forced into the job by the Camorra. They were often put on substances. This helped increase criminal activity as they usually spent a large part of their income purchasing narcotics for consumption. Number 5. Edina Arellano Felix. Edina Arellano Felix de Toledo is a Mexican substance lord who, alongside her brothers, founded the Tijuana cartel and played a role as a logistical accountant for the criminal organization. Throughout most of the 1990s, the Tijuana cartel was headed by her 6 brothers, while Edina advised and helped them in money laundering and financial administration. But after the fall of a financial mastermind in the cartel in the year 2000, Edina took up the position. She first started working behind the scenes as a money launderer for the Tijuana cartel, but then ended up leading the cartel after the arrest of her brother Eduardo Arellano Felix in 2008. Since most of her brothers are either incarcerated or deceased, Edina has managed the financial aspect of the organization, overseen alliances, and taken the lead of the Tijuana cartel alongside Luis Fernando before his capture in 2014. Her historical contacts with substance suppliers in Colombia managed to keep the organization afloat. Number 4. Catherine Knight. John Charles Thomas Price was the father of 3 children when Knight began an affair with him. Reputedly a terrific bloke liked by everyone who knew him, his own marriage had ended in 1988. While his 2-year-old daughter had remained with his former wife, the 2 older children lived with him. Price was well aware of Knight's violent reputation as she moved into his house in 1995. His children liked her, he was making a lot of money working in the local mines, and apart from the violent arguments, at first, life was a bunch of roses. In 1998, Knight and Prince fought over his refusal to marry her. In retaliation, she videotaped items he had allegedly stole from work and sent the tape to his boss. Although the items were out-of-date medical kits that he had scavenged from the company Rubbish Tip, Price was fired from the job he had held for 17 years. That same day, he kicked her out and she returned to her own home while news of what she had done spread throughout the town. A few months later, Price restarted the relationship, although he now refused to allow her to move in with him. The fighting became even more frequent, and most of his friends would no longer have anything to do with him while they remained together. In February 2000, a series of assaults on Price culminated with Knight stabbing him in the chest. Finally fed up, he kicked her out of his house. On the 29th of February, he stopped at the Scone Magistrates Court on his way to work and took out a restraining order in an attempt to keep her away from both himself and his children. That afternoon, Prince told his coworkers that if he did not come to work the next day, it would be because Knight had ended him. Despite their pleas that Price should not return home, he stated that he was afraid Knight would hurt his children if he did not. Price arrived home to find that Knight, although not there herself, had sent the children away for a sleepover at a friend's house. He then spent that evening with his neighbors before returning home and going to bed at 11 p.m. Knight later arrived at Price's house while he was sleeping and sat watching television for a few minutes before having a shower. She then woke Price and they had intimate relations, after which he fell asleep. At 6 a.m. the next day, a neighbor became concerned that Price's car was still in the driveway. And when he did not arrive at work, his employer sent a worker to see what was wrong. Both the neighbor and the worker tried knocking on Price's bedroom window to wake him, but they alerted police after noticing blood on the front door. Breaking down the back door, police found Price's body, with Knight comatose from taking a large amount of substances. She had stabbed Pierce with a butcher's knife while he was sleeping. According to the blood evidence, he awoke and tried to turn the light on before attempting to escape while Knight chased him throughout the house. He managed to open the front door and get outside, but he either stumbled back inside or was dragged back into the hallway where he finally passed away after bleeding out. Later, Knight went into Aberdeen and withdrew $1,000 from Price's account at an ATM. Price's autopsy revealed that he had been stabbed at least 37 times, in both the front and back of his body, with many of the wounds extending into vital organs. Number 3. Juana Barraza. Juana Barraza is a Mexican serial ender and former professional wrestler dubbed the Little Old Lady Butcher, sentenced to 759 years in prison for the ending of 16 elderly women. The first slaughter attributed to Mata Vajitas had been dated variously to the late 1990s and to a specific termination on the 17th of November 2003. The authorities and the press have given various estimates as to the total number of her victims, with estimates ranging from 42 to 48 endings. After the arrest of Juana Barraza, the case of the woman was officially closed despite more than 30 unresolved cases. All of Barraza's victims were women aged 60 or over, many of whom lived alone. Barraza bludgeoned or strangled them before robbing them. Bernardo Batiz, the chief prosecutor in Mexico City, initially profiled the ender as having a brilliant mind, being quite clever and careful, and suggested that the ender probably struck after gaining the trust of the intended victim. Investigating officers suspected that the ender posed as a government official, offering victims the chance to sign up for welfare programs. The search for Barraza was complicated by conflicting evidence. At one point, the police hypothesized that 2 enders might actually be involved. An odd coincidence also distracted the investigation. At least 3 of Barraza's victims owned a print of an 18th century painting by French artist Jean-Baptiste Greuze, a boy in a red waistcoat. The authorities believed that Juana Barraza was a psychopath who felt no remorse. Furthermore, Barraza associated her elderly victims with her mother and believed that she was helping society by ending them. Number 2. Claudia Ochoa Felix. Claudia Ochoa Felix was a social media personality. In 2014, a rumor spread on social media that she was a high-ranking leader of the Execution Squad Los Antrax, a block of enforcers that operate as an armed wing of the Sinaloa cartel. After their leader Jose Gamboa was arrested, Ochoa Felix was rumored to be one of the leaders. She denied the claims and her involvement in organized crime. Ochoa Felix was known on social media for her resemblance to Kim Kardashian and had accounts on various social media sites, including Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Ochoa Felix's photos revealed her luxurious lifestyle, which showed her with sports cars, planes, yachts, and various weapons. Ochoa Felix was found passed away in her private residence in Culiacan on the 14th of September 2019, due to apparent pulmonary aspiration caused by a substance overdose. The previous night she had been seen going home with an unidentified man after attending a party in the city center. The morning after, the unidentified man raised an alarm due to Felix not responding. She was pronounced gone at the scene. Many people began to rumor online that Felix had been assassinated due to her affiliations with the infamous Los Antrax Squad and the Sinaloa cartel. Claudia Felix fans assure that she was Drake's crush, who followed each other on social networks and sent messages, they say. When she passed, Drake and Claudia Ochoa Felix were in Twitter trends. Number 1. The queen of crime herself, Bonnie Parker. Bonnie Elizabeth Parker was born in 1910 in Rowena, Texas, the second of 3 children. Her father, Charles Robert Parker, was a bricklayer who passed away when Bonnie was just 4 years old. Her widowed mother, Emma Parker, moved her family back to her parents' home in Cement City, an industrial suburb in West Dallas, where she worked as a seamstress. As an adult, Bonnie wrote poems such as The Trail's End, or more commonly known as The Story of Bonnie and Clyde. In her second year in high school, Parker met Roy Thornton. The couple dropped out of school and married on September 25, 1926, 6 days before her 16th birthday. Their marriage was marred by his frequent absences and brushes with the law and proved to be short-lived. They never divorced, but their paths never crossed again after January 1929. Parker was still wearing the wedding ring Thornton had given her when she passed. Thornton was in prison when he heard about her passing, commenting, "I'm glad they jumped out like they did. It's much better than being caught." Sentenced to 5 years for robbery in 1933, and after attempting several prison breaks from other facilities, Thornton was ended while trying to escape from the Huntsville State Prison on October 3, 1937. After she left Thornton, Parker moved back in with her mother and worked as a waitress in Dallas. One of her regular customers was postal worker Ted Hinton. In 1932, he joined the Dallas County Sheriff's Department and eventually served as a member of the posse that ended Bonnie and Clyde. Parker briefly kept a diary early in 1929 when she was aged 18, writing of her loneliness and impatience with life in Dallas and her love of photography. Number 10. Clementine Barnabet. Barnabet eventually confessed to 35 removals of life. She explained her connection to the Church of Sacrifice, an offshoot of a Christ-sanctified Holy Church congregation in Lake Charles, Louisiana. Clementine further claimed that a priestess of the Church of Sacrifice had given her and her friends conjure bags, a good luck charm found in hoodoo, that would grant them supernatural powers and make them undetectable to authorities. This spurred Barnabet into committing her first execution to test whether or not the claim of magical protection was true. Her confession was described in contemporary reports as very self-contradictory, such as sometimes claiming to have committed the executions alone and other times to have acted with others. She named many of her alleged accomplices, but none were ever charged with the crime. Modern analysts have tended to doubt Barnabet's involvement in the executions. In their 2017 book, The Man from the Train, authors Bill James and Rachel McCarthy James argue that some, but not all, of the executions were committed by a serial ender named Paul Mueller, with others committed by copycats. Other than the fact that she had conjure bags, they write, "Nothing that Clementine said about the executions, A, can be confirmed by any other party, or B, has the ring of truth about it. A great deal of what she said is demonstrably false." It's possible that she was just saying she was the head of this cult, but in reality, there was someone else pulling the strings. Number 9. Anne Hamilton Byrne. The family, also called the Great White Brotherhood, is an Australian New Age group formed in the mid-1960s under the leadership of yoga teacher Anne Hamilton Byrne. Anne Hamilton Byrne acquired 14 infants and young children between about 1968 and 1975. Some were the natural children of members of the family. Others had been obtained through irregular adoptions arranged by lawyers, doctors, and social workers within the group who could bypass the normal processes. The children's identities were changed using false birth certificates or deed poll, all being given the surname Hamilton Byrne. And dressed alike, even to the extent of most of them having their hair being dyed uniformly blonde. The group's headquarters was raided by the police on the 14th of August 1987, and all children were removed from the premises. In June 1993, Hamilton Byrne was charged with conspiracy to defraud and to commit perjury by falsely registering the births of 3 unrelated children as her own triplets, but those charges were eventually dropped. She pleaded guilty to the remaining charge of making a false declaration and was fined $5,000. In August 2009, 2 individuals received financial compensation from Anne Hamilton Byrne after suing her. Her granddaughter, Rebecca Cook Hamilton, sued her in 2007 for alleged psychiatric and psychological illness. She alleged that she received cruel and inhuman treatment from Hamilton Byrne and her servants, including beatings, being locked in a freezer shed overnight, and being forced to take medications. Her award was estimated to be $250,000. Number 8. Terry Lee Hoffman. Hoffman was born to poverty and sent to a Lutheran orphanage at 9. She was adopted 2 years later and named Terry Lee Benson. She was committed to the Parkland Hospital for psychiatric evaluation during divorce proceedings in 1971, but got custody of the oldest child. In the 1950s, Hoffman became interested in meditation, metaphysics, hypnotism, Silva mind control, and the writings of Edgar Cayce. After attracting a number of followers in the late 1960s, she incorporated her movement as conscious development of body, mind, and soul in 1974, selling lessons and private consultations. Hoffman also started a jewelry business, incorporating it as CD Gems. Followers were instructed to buy expensive handmade jewelry that she would turn into powerful protective gems. By the mid-1970s, over 100 people attended the weekly lectures in Dallas, Texas, and many more took Hoffman's printed lessons. Aiding them were God and the 12 masters, such as Jesus, who were visible to Hoffman. Hoffman taught her followers to avoid critical thoughts, negative energies, as they could prove fatal. However, passing away was not to be feared, as the ultimate goal was rebirth in the spiritual realm. Number 7. Bonnie Nettles. Nettles met Marshall Applewhite in March 1972, though where they met is uncertain. In his writings, Applewhite claimed to have been visiting a hospitalized friend when Mrs. Nettles entered the room and their eyes locked in a shared recognition of esoteric secrets. However, Applewhite's writings were prone to hyperbole or relaying everything as some occurrence of fate. Terry Nettles, Bonnie's daughter, worked at a theater where Applewhite produced weekend children's shows and taught in an in-house drama school. She has stated that someone got hurt at the drama school in the theater. Herf accompanied the injured person to the hospital where he met Bonnie. Joe Nettles, one of Bonnie's sons, wasn't entirely sure how they met or whether their first meeting was at the theater. Nettles agreed to perform an astrological reading for Applewhite. They had an almost instantaneous spiritual connection. Applewhite decided that Nettles was to be the sage, he the speaker. They left together on New Year's Day on 1973. Nettles and Applewhite established Heaven's Gate together as equals, with Nettles running the group and Applewhite speaking for her. Nettles claimed to have communicated with aliens about the next level and told Applewhite to tell their followers. Number 6. Valentina de Andrade. Due to the high level of violence, their crimes reached widespread attention. The subsequent investigation was led by Civil Police Chief Adar Mauro. Initially, the slaughters weren't connected to each other, which led to many of them being abandoned for lack of evidence. In 1990, after the first investigations were completed, the Para police arrested Rotilio de Souza, a drifter who wandered through the city streets. Investigators truly believed he was responsible, but de Souza passed in prison under suspicious circumstances some months later. However, the occurrence of new slaughters with the same characteristics as the previous ones showed that he wasn't the perpetrator. Work resumed and other lines of investigations were followed. One of them maintained the existence of an alleged gang of traffickers who were kidnapping the city's children to extract their organs. For the police, the manner in which the cuts were induced indicated clinical motivation, besides the possible participation of doctors. The recent move of 2 doctors to the city caught the attention of investigators. They were Anicio Ferreira de Souza and Cecio Brando, who had moved to Altamira in 1990. However, expert reports proved that as they were extracted, the organs were unusable for transportation purposes. Without sufficient evidence, the doctors were released and the case went cold. In 1993, the researchers reopened the case and rearrested de Souza and Brandao again. According to witnesses, these men participated in a sect called the Superior Universal Lineage, a mystical organization that, among other things, challenged the Western idea of divinity and preached caution in living with children. In a book called God, the Great Scam, the sect's founder, Valentina de Andrade, stated, "Watch out for children. They are unconscious instruments of the great scam called God and his evil collaborators." Number 5. Sylvia Moraz. At some point, Moraz became convinced that she could receive economic favors if she offered human sacrifices to Santa Muerte. Motivated by delirious ideas, she orchestrated the removals with the complicity of her family to win Santa Muerte's favor. Moraz gained the following of 8 members of her family, including 4 of her 5 children. The first victim was Sylvia Moraz's 55-year-old friend, Cleotilde Romero Pacheco, who was found ended in December 2009. Cleotilde Romero was a local woman who sold popsicles. She had no close relatives. Moraz later recounted that she had told Romero to pick up a 20 peso note off the ground, and when Romero went down to pick it up, she struck her in the neck with an axe. She made an offering of the victim's blood in order to obtain protection on the part of Santo Muerte. The final victim was Jesus Octavio Martinez Yanez, another boy. Martinez was the adopted son of Ivan Martin Baron Moraz, and therefore Moraz's grandson. He was terminated in July 2010. In this crime, Moraz held the boy in front of the altar while one of her daughters slaughtered him. A statement by prosecutors indicated that 3 children were involved in some way, at the very least witnessing the crime. According to one of Zoila Santa Cruz's daughters, Moraz had threatened to end them if they did not commit the crimes. The children were beheaded in the rituals. Number 4. Amy Carlson. In the mid-2000s, Carlson developed an interest in New Age philosophy, which she grew increasingly obsessed with. By 2009, she started a group called Galactic Federation of Light with fellow New Age aficionado Amaranth White Eagle. The group believed that Carlson was a divine being who was called Mother God, and they adopted conspiracy theories as their theology. During the global virus, the group posted up together in Kauai, Hawaii, where they were met with protests and criticisms after Carlson claimed to be a Hawaiian goddess, Pele. However, in 2021, Carlson's mummified body was found in Denver, after her cause of passing appeared to be from ingesting colloidal silver, a supposed cure for the virus that Love Has Won was promoting. Number 3. Teal Swan. The jury is still out on whether Teal Swan, a self-proclaimed spiritual teacher and definitely a YouTube phenomenon, is a cult leader. She's admitted that she has all the spanners in her toolbox to start a cult, but denies that she's managed those particular ideas yet, preferring to see herself as an ethical, caring alternative to proper psychological care by professionals who know what they're talking about. Teal, a striking woman with a stoic, monotone voice, specializes in self-removals. That's to say, among her expanding grab bag of New Age theories, recovered memory therapies, and claims that she can sense what all your organs are doing at any given time, she is best known for claiming, mostly through hundreds of YouTube videos, to be able to provide help for those having dark thoughts. Number 2. Ma Anand Sheila. In 1981, Rajneesh appointed her as his personal assistant. In the same year, she convinced Rajneesh to leave India and establish an ashram in the United States. In July 1981, Rajneesh Foundation International purchased the 64,000-acre Big Muddy Ranch in Wasco County, Oregon, which became the site for the development of Rajneeshpuram Commune. She was appointed the president of Rajneesh Foundation International, managed the commune, and met daily with Rajneesh to discuss business matters. According to Sheila, Rajneesh was complicit in and directed her involvement in criminal acts she and a group of Rajneeshis committed later. By 1984, the ashram was coming into increasing conflict with local residents and the Wasco County Board of Commissioners. Sheila attempted to have both Rajneeshi candidates for the 2 open seats of the Wasco County Board of Commissioners win the November election. She had hundreds of homeless people bust into ashram, and she had them registered as voters in Wasco County. Later, when the local election board rejected the voter registrations, Sheila conspired to use bacteria and other methods to make people ill and prevent them from voting. She had salmonella put into salad bars at 10 restaurants in the Dalles, Oregon. About 750 people became ill with salmonella poisoning. Number 1. Ruth E Norman. Ruth E Norman, also known as Uriel, was an American religious leader who co-founded the Uranius Academy of Science, based in Southern California. In the 1940s, she developed an interest in psychic phenomena and past life regression. These pursuits led her to her introduction to Ernest Norman, a self-described psychic, in 1954. He engaged in channeling, past life regression, and attempts at communicating with extraterrestrials. She married Ernest, her 4th husband, in the mid-1950s. Together they published several books about his revelations and formed Uranius, an organization which later became known as the Uranius Academy of Science, to popularize his teachings. The couple discussed numerous details about their alleged past lives and spiritual visits to other planets. After Ernest passed away in 1971, Ruth succeeded him as the group's leader and primary channeler. In early 1974, she predicted that a space fleet of benevolent extraterrestrials, the Space Brothers, would land on Earth later that year, which led the Uranus Academy to purchase a property to serve as the landing site. Despite predicting that she would live to see the extraterrestrials land, Norman passed in 1993. Uranus has continued to operate after her passing and formed a board of directors. Number 10. Monica Proetti, aka Machine Gun Molly. A Montreal native, Monica Proetti was arguably fated towards a life of crime. Proetti's grandmother did some hard time for stealing and allegedly ran a crime school for kids in the neighborhood, and both of her husbands were linked to the underworld, one being Anthony Smith, a Scottish gangster who was deported in 1962, and the other, Viator Tessier, who was jailed in 1966 for armed robbery. But Proetti far surpassed her roots and spouses in terms of criminal notoriety. During her tenure as a prominent Montreal gangster, Proetti robbed over 20 different banks with the help of accomplices, amassing a small fortune of $100,000. Better yet, Proetti was said to bring her kids along for the robberies, redefining Bring Your Kids to Work Day entirely. Proetti eventually met an end fitting for her fast-paced life as a criminal on September 19, 1967, what was supposed to be her last job. Following a bank robbery in which the funds were intended to go towards Proetti starting a new life in Florida, a high-speed chase ensued in the northern sector of Montreal, ending in a fatal crash into a bus. The next day, when police were investigating the recent whereabouts of Proetti, a gold-plated right down to the trigger semi-automatic machine gun was found in an apartment rented by one of her recent lovers. No definite link was made between the gold gun and Proetti, but the police had a hunch it was hers, which was enough for us. Number 9. Angel Grineer, aka the Maple Syrup Rebel. There's an underbelly to the maple syrup industry of Quebec, and right in the thick of it is Angel Grineer, a self-acclaimed smuggler and dealer of Canada's sweetest export. Deemed a maple syrup rebel by the BBC, Grineer had gained some international notoriety recently, mostly for not backing down against the Fédération des producteurs acéricoles du Québec. I am sorry for my accent. You see, in Quebec, maple syrup producers pretty much need to follow the rules of the FPAQ. The organization sets the wage at which producers are paid for syrup, charges a 12% fee per pound, and claims a majority of a producer's crop. Miss Grineer isn't a fan of this system, loading her and her husband's syrup, which they've been farming for years, into barrels. Grineer then smuggles her amber gold across the provincial line and sells it in New Brunswick. To Miss Grineer, the FPAQ is a maple syrup mafia she wants no part in, going on to say that the situation is completely ridiculous. Only a few of us dare to fight the Federation because it built a system based on fear, and it has much bigger financial resources than us. Neither Grineer or her husband have been arrested for their maple syrup smuggling, though she's already received a $500,000 fine and jail time is predicted. Guess you could call that a sticky situation. I'm sorry. Number 8. The Heavy Heart Bandit. It takes some serious gumption to rob a bank, and even more when you're doing it solely with your words and no weapon in sight. That's pretty much what the Toronto bank robber known solely as the Heavy Heart Bandit accomplished. Twice in one day, too. Sporting a t-shirt with a large heart emblem, hence the nickname, the 20 to 25-year-old female walked right into a bank on Albion and Finch in Toronto at about 1:50 p.m. on June 19, 2009, and told the bank teller to pay up. No gun was seen on the woman, though she said she claimed to have one on her person. With cash in tow, she left the bank. Only a couple of hours later, at around 7:20 p.m., and only a few blocks down the road on Wilson Avenue, the exact same woman pulled off the same exact stunt at a second bank. The rule of 3 thankfully didn't apply in this instance, however, as the Heavy Heart Bandit hasn't been reported on since, nor was she apprehended by authorities. So she's still out there, fellas. Number 7. Stephanie Beaudoin, aka the world's hottest criminal. About a year ago, a Quebec woman caused an internet uproar, not so much for what she did, but more for how she looked while doing it. Yes, that's completely objectifying and awful, but it happened with Stephanie Beaudoin, a Quebec citizen charged with 114 different charges that was named world's hottest criminal by more than a few sources too. Aged 21 at the time, Beaudoin's long list of charges included breaking and entering, thievery, and the possession of 9 stolen guns. Beaudoin then gained internet fame after a tweet was sent out with her image as she sported a bikini. Looks can't get you everywhere, as Beaudoin is now facing 18 months in prison after pleading guilty to almost 40 different break-ins and other crimes. Number 6. Pearl Hart, aka the Wild West Bandit. Even though Pearl Hart's most notorious crime was committed in Old West era America, she was still born in Canada. Hart's claim to criminal fame occurred on May 30th, 1899. Yeah, that's a long time ago, when she, along with a man who went by the name of Joe Boot, robbed a stagecoach traveling between parts of Arizona. Decked out in menswear and equipped with a .38 revolver, Hart and her accomplice stole $431.20 from the stagecoach's passengers, then fled the scene on horseback. The duo's triumph didn't last long. On June 5th, 1899, Hart and Boot were apprehended by Sheriff Truman of Pinal County and incarcerated shortly after. For a while, Hart was a criminal starlet, as the nation went nuts for a female stagecoach robber. Hart was eventually released from prison in 1902 thanks to a pardon from Arizona's governor. The exact reason for why Hart received the pardon is up for speculation. Hart's life after prison is somewhat spotty as well. Even her passing could be set anywhere between December 30th, 1955 to 1960. Number 5. Renee Akeby, Canada's second female dangerous offender. In Canada, citizens can be given a dangerous offender designation, which is essentially a way of warning anyone that the person in question is violent, dangerous, and otherwise a danger to the safety of others. Little over 500 Canadians are currently deemed dangerous offenders, with Renee Akeby being the only living female Canadian in the group. Interestingly, Akeby received her DO status after already being in jail, largely due to 6 hostage situations enacted by the female Canadian criminal. All of said hostage situations were quite violent in nature, with the most horrific one occurring in 2005, when Akeby and another inmate violently tortured a prison nurse and counselor over the course of several hours. In 2011, Akeby was designated a dangerous offender, and is known to spend a majority of her time in prison alone due to her violent nature. Akeby authored a blog post on her experience in prison, but I'm not sure who's reading that. Number 4. Carla Homoka. Few would like to remember the actions of Carla Homoka, who, along with her husband Paul Bernardo, was responsible for the passing of 2 Ontario girls, and her own sister. Bernardo and Homoka's criminal actions are quite graphic and will not be recounted in detail here, because YouTube. Arrested in 1993 for their crimes, Homoka received a lighter sentence than Bernardo, claiming she was abused by her husband and forced to enact such reprehensible actions, and struck a plea deal. Video footage then came out of the couple's crimes that would refute Homoka's claims, though her deal remained intact for some reason, and she was released from prison in 2005. Since, Homoka has remarried, given birth to a baby boy, and moved to Quebec. Despite claims that she moved to Guadalupe with her family, using the name Leanne Bordelaise, recent reports have cited that Homoka still resides in the province. Number 3. Eileen Warnos. Eileen Warnos had a tragic childhood, having been abandoned by her mother and raised by her grandparents. Her father, an accused abuser, hung himself in prison. It must have run in the family because Warnos claimed her grandfather intimately abused her growing up. At the age of 15, she was thrown out of the house and lived in the woods. She sold herself in order to survive. She then hitchhiked to Florida and at the age of 20 married Louis Fell, a 69-year-old yacht club owner. The marriage only lasted 9 weeks and ended with a restraining order against her. 10 years later, she met the love of her life, Tyria Moore, a hotel maid that would become her partner in crime. Since Warnos' meager income was not enough for the couple to survive on, they took to ending Warnos' clients and robbing them. She shot her 6 victims and police found the bodies in various areas in Florida. She also ended another man, but his body was never found. Instead, witnesses identified her and Moore driving the victim's car. His items found in pawn shops had fingerprints linking to Warnos. She was arrested in 1991 and put to execution in 2002. Number 2. Janine Jones. Janine Jones was a pediatric nurse in Texas who had a taste for drama. She loved being put in dangerous scenarios where she would save a child and be praised as a hero for her actions. Her involuntary actors would be injected with igoxin, heparin, and succinylcholine to make them gravely ill, and unfortunately many of them would not survive long enough for Jones to save them. So much so that the first hospital she worked for noticed the alarming passing away rate of the people under her care and forced her to resign. It was at her next job that her crimes would be discovered. The hospital began noticing a number of people having breathing problems and other strange illnesses, although they weren't fatal. However, when Chelsea McClellan was brought to the hospital for a regular immunization for mumps and measles and passed away from cardiac arrest, suspicions rose even more. Even the media started to report these mysterious passings, and following the discovery of succinylcholine in McClellan's body, Jones was charged with slaughter. She was also convicted of attempted slaughter when heparin was also found in another person's system. She now serves 99 years in prison but is scheduled to receive parole in 2017. Number 1. Griselda Blanco. Griselda Blanco, dubbed such nicknames as the Godmother, Queen of Powder, and the Black Widow, was raised by an abusive mother in Colombia and resorted to a life of crime and selling herself at an early age. After the passing of her first husband, she became involved with a substance trafficker named Alberto Bravo. They moved to New York in the early 70s and ran a successful narcotics trade, where Blanco designed lingerie to smuggle in powder. After being indicted with 30 others for what was at the time the biggest powder case in history, she and Bravo fled to Colombia. They later returned to the US in the late 70s with their new base in Miami. Being involved in the narcotics trade, Blanco was involved in many other crimes as well. She was a ruthless woman and was notorious for her drive-by shootings by motorcycle. She is said to have invented this ending method. In 1979, she orchestrated the Dade County shopping mall massacre, where 4 people were terminated. Alberto Bravo met his end when he got into a dispute with Blanco regarding substance money. In turn, she shot him and his 6 bodyguards. She must have been quick on the trigger. She was not opposed to ending people who were young, and being a bi person, would conduct female parties where she would sometimes execute the people afterwards for her pleasure. Because of her cruelty, the millionaire made many enemies, and to avoid the assassination attempts, moved to California. In 1985, she was arrested and eventually deported to Colombia in 2004, where one of her enemies finally got their revenge. In 2012, she was removed while walking out of a butcher shop, ironically, by a motorcycle drive-by shooting. Number 10. Bonnie wrote poetry. Okay, this doesn't sound very chilling, but her poetry was actually kinda creepy.
What you writing?
Writing a poem about us.
Yeah? Let me hear it. Come on.
Okay, just let me finish this one.
During her school days, Bonnie excelled at creative writing and writing poetry. While she was imprisoned in 1932 after a failed hardware store robbery, she penned a collection of 10 different poems that she entitled Poetry from Life's Other Side, which included The Story of Self-Hurt Sal, a poem about an innocent country girl lured by her boyfriend into a life of crime. Sound familiar?
You've heard the story of Jesse James, of how he lived and died. If you're still in need of something to read, here's the story of Bonnie and Clyde.
You think if I sent that into newspapers that print it, I'm gonna do it.
2 weeks before her passing, Bonnie gave a strangely accurate poem about the future of her life to her mother entitled The Trail's End, that finished with the verse, "Someday they'll go down together, and they'll bury 'em side by side. To a few it'll be grief, to the law a relief, but it's termination for Bonnie and Clyde." That slaps, by the way. That's lyrics right there.
You know what you done there? You told my story. You told my whole story right there, right there. One time I told you I was gonna make you somebody, that's what you done for me. You made me somebody they gonna remember.
At the end of each point, I'll be giving you guys some stanzas from her poem. Number 9, Bonnie was wearing a ring before her passing, but it wasn't from Clyde. 6 days before turning 16, Bonnie married high school classmate Roy Thornton. The marriage fell apart very quickly, within months, and Bonnie never again saw her husband after he was imprisoned for robbery in 1929. It seems like Bonnie had a thing for bad boys. Soon after, Bonnie met Clyde, and although the pair fell in love, she never divorced Thornton. On the day Bonnie and Clyde were removed from the world in 1934, she was still wearing Thornton's wedding ring and actually had a tattoo on the inside of her right thigh, with two interconnected hearts labeled Bonnie and Roy. Clyde really got the short end of the stick there. No tattoo, no ring. Dang. The first stanza is this. You've read the story of Jesse James, of how he crossed the Great Divide. If you're still in need of something to read, here's the story of Bonnie and Clyde. Now, Bonnie and Clyde are the Barrow Gang. I'm sure you all have read how they rob and steal, and those who squeal are usually found filled with lead. Number 8, Clyde was rejected from the US Navy. As a teenager, Clyde attempted to enlist in the US Navy, but lingering effects from a serious boyhood illness, possibly malaria or yellow fever, resulted in his medical rejection. It was a hard blow for Clyde, who had already tattooed USN on his left arm. This really is a testament to tattoos. You gotta make sure it's worth it when you get a tattoo. Clyde really should have waited until his acceptance letter arrived for him to get that. Clyde was indeed very pro-Navy and was actually photographed in a sailor suit a couple times. It definitely wasn't a real sailor suit because, you know. The minimum age for enlistment in the US Navy jumped back and forth between 17 and 18 years old. But by the time his birthday rolled around in March of 1926, the enlistment age was 17. By the end of that year, Clyde had been arrested for stealing a car, and even though charges were eventually dropped, this police record may have been enough to prevent him from enlisting if he hadn't failed the physical. Here's the next stanza. There's lots of untruths to these write-ups. They're not as ruthless as that. Their nature is raw. They hate all the law, the stool pigeons, spotters, and rats. They call them cold-blooded butchers. They say they are heartless and mean. But I say this with pride that I once knew Clyde when he was honest and upright and clean. Number 7. Speaking of that car he stole, the notorious criminal Clyde Champion Barrow was first arrested in 1926 for automobile theft after failing to return a car he had rented in Dallas to visit an estranged high school girlfriend. The rental car agency dropped the charges, but the incident remained on Clyde's arrest record. Just 3 weeks later, he was arrested again alongside his older brother, Ivan Buck Barrow, for an even more farcical crime possession of a truckload of stolen turkeys. The turkeys, it turned out, were stolen, and both brothers were arrested. Clyde didn't go to jail, that time at least, but the incident earned him a reputation. Turkey Man Clyde. Law fooled around, kept taking him down, and locking him up in a cell. Till he said to me, I'll never be free, so I'll meet a few of them in hell. The road was so dimly lighted, there were no highway signs to guide, but they made up their minds, if all roads were blind, they wouldn't give up till they lied. Number 6. Clyde chopped off 2 of his toes in prison. While serving a 14-year sentence in Texas for robbery and automobile theft in January 1932, Clyde decided he could no longer endure the unforgiving work and brutal conditions at the notoriously tough East Ham prison farm. In the hopes of forcing a transfer to a less harsh facility, Clyde severed his left big toe and a portion of a second toe with an axe, although it is not known whether he or another prisoner wielded the sharp instrument. The self-mutilation, which permanently crippled his walking stride and prevented him from wearing shoes while driving, ultimately proved unnecessary as he was released on parole 6 days later. Another example of Clyde really getting the timing wrong on another big decision. It seems Bonnie was the brains of the operations, because if it was Clyde, I think they'd be unlucky in their robberies. The road gets dimmer and dimmer. Sometimes you can hardly see. But it's fight man to man and do all you can, for they know they can never be free. From heartbreak, some people have suffered. From weariness, some people have cried. But take it all in all, our troubles are small till we get like Bonnie and Clyde. Number 5. Bonnie and Clyde, notorious bank robbers, actually didn't like robbing banks. Take that in. Bonnie, Clyde, and their associates went on a crime spree from the summer of 1932 through the spring of 1934, so they're often associated with other famous outlaws of the era, like bank robber John Dillinger. But the Barrow Gang, Clyde was the undisputed leader, considered robbing banks too much trouble. Instead, they targeted shops and gas stations, which were less risky. That also means they didn't amass large sums of money and resorted to cracking open gumball machines for extra change.
Do about Bonnie and Clyde. We will capture them. Write that down and underline it twice.
Although often depicted as Depression-era Robin Hoods who stole from rich and powerful financial institutions, Bonnie and Clyde staged far more robberies of mom-and-pop gas stations and grocery stores than bank heists. It's kind of disappointing. If a policeman is ended in Dallas and they have no clue or guide, if they can't find a fiend, they just wipe their slate clean and hang it on Bonnie and Clyde. There's 2 crimes committed in America, not a credit to the Barrow mob. They had no hand in the kidnap demand, nor the Kansas City depot job. Number 4. Bonnie was involved in a car accident that left her with a limp. On the night of June 10th, 1933, Clyde, with Bonnie in the passenger seat, was speeding along the rural roads of North Texas so quickly that he missed a detour sign warning of a bridge under construction. The duo's Ford V8 smashed through a barricade at 70 miles per hour and sailed through the air before landing in a dry riverbed. Scalding acid poured out of the smashed car battery and severely burned Bonnie's right leg, eating away at her flesh down to the bone in some places. As a result of the 3rd-degree burns, Bonnie, like Clyde, walked with a pronounced limp for the rest of her life, and she had such difficulty walking that at times she hopped or needed Clyde to carry her. That's a good boyfriend right there. Except when he crashed their car, and when he dragged his girlfriend into a life of crime. Okay, maybe he's not the best boyfriend. A newsboy once said to his buddy, "I wish old Clyde would get jumped. In these awful hard times, we'd make a few dimes if 5 or 6 cops would get bumped. The police haven't got the report yet, but Clyde called me up today. He said, 'Don't start any fights, we aren't working nights, we're joining the NRA.'" Number 3. People at the scene of their passings wanted to take souvenirs of their bodies. On May 23, 1934, a 6-man posse led by former Texas Ranger Captain Frank Hamer ambushed Bonnie and Clyde and pumped more than 130 rounds of steel-jacketed bullets into their stolen Ford V8 outside Sales, Louisiana. After dozens of robberies and 13 slaughters in their name, Bonnie and Clyde's crime spree had finally come to an end. With acrid gun smoke still lingering in the air, gawkers descended upon the ambush site and attempted to leave with macabre souvenirs from the bodies of the outlaws still slumped in the front seat. According to Jeff Gwynn's book, Go Down Together, one man tried to cut off Clyde's ear with a pocket knife, and another attempted to sever his trigger finger before the lawmen intervened. One person in the ordeal, however, managed to clip locks of Bonnie's hair and swaths of her blood-soaked dress. That guy's a lucky guy, he must be selling it on Etsy right now. From Irving to West Dallas Viaduct is known as the Great Divide, where the women are kin and the men are men, and they won't stool on Bonnie and Clyde. If they try to act like citizens and rent them a nice little flat, about the 3rd night, they're invited to fight by a subgun's rat-a-tat-tat. Number 2, their car is on display at a casino. Following the ambush of Bonnie and Clyde, a Louisiana sheriff who was a member of Hamer's 6-man posse claimed the pockmarked Ford V8 sedan still coated with the outlaws' blood and tissue. A federal judge, however, ruled that the automobile stolen by Bonnie and Clyde should return to its former owner, Ruth Warren of Topeka, Kansas. Warren leased and eventually sold the car to Charles Stanley, an anti-crime lecturer who toured fairgrounds with the Demise car, and the mothers of Bonnie and Clyde in tow as sideshow attractions. Still speckled with bullet holes, the Demise car is on display at Whiskey Pete's Resort and Casino near Las Vegas, Nevada.
Hey, isn't that Malcolm there?
They don't think they're too smart or desperate. They know that the law always wins. They've been shot at before, but they do not ignore that demise is the wages of sin. Someday they'll go down together. They'll bury them side by side. To few it'll be grief, to the law a relief, but it's demise for Bonnie and Clyde. Number 1, they were buried separately. Although linked in life, Bonnie and Clyde were split after their passings. While the pair wished to be buried side by side, if you remember her poem, Bonnie's mother, who had disapproved of her relationship with Clyde, had her daughter buried in a separate Dallas cemetery. Clyde was buried next to his brother Marvin underneath a gravestone with his hand-picked epitaph, "Gone but not forgotten." Stories about how Bonnie and Clyde met vary. One account written after their passings says Clyde visited a female friend's house while Bonnie made hot chocolate in the kitchen. Others say they met at a party, but nearly everyone agrees that they were inseparable from the start. As one member of their gang put it, Bonnie was like Clyde. They had grit. They meant to stay free or go down together. Thanks for watching. Leave a like and comment if you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time on Crime Time, baby.